Zani, if you're with us, we'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Randy. It's always great to hear about the Americans for the Arts work. I'm going to talk about how Arts Vibrant is your community. Our intention is to stimulate thought about how cities vary in their arts vibrancy, the myriad forms that vibrancy can take, and how to target investments in arts vibrancy along a variety of measures in order to increase the supply and demand of arts and culture, but also, to Randy's point, to help to improve the economic and social outcomes that are secondary to the arts. The arts and culture ecosystem. So we approach this work by saying, arts organizations don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in communities. So to understand a community's arts vibrancy, you really have to start by considering the whole ecology of the community. So when we start with data, we try to bring in sources of data that represent each of these kind of layers of the onion of the ecosystem. So the model features a complex and interdependent set of relationships among artists and arts organizations, the communities in which they reside, and government funding that influences both the production and consumption of arts and culture. We capture these relationships by geolocating every arts and cultural organization in the country, and then connecting them to the data on their communities. We know from our research that all of these elements that you're seeing here have an impact on an arts organization's performance. Next slide. Every year for the past 6 years, we have published Arts Vibrancy Index report, and this lists the top arts vibrant communities. In doing so, we look at metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas, or MSAs, as well as metro divisions. So where the Office of Management and Budget breaks down really, really large metro areas into blocks of like 2.5 million people, we do the same in terms of comparison. So we let the data tell us which MSAs rise to the top. Each metro and micro area consists of one or more counties, and it includes the counties containing the core urban area, as well as adjacent counties that have a high degree of social and economic integration. So you think about it, arts and cultural organizations may exist just in the urban core, but audience members, artists, production personnel, administrators may live in the outlying areas. The airport may be located in an outlying area. So we're looking at where is there that social and economic tie to the organization. If you click, Michelle, 2 points. The first, arts vibrancy is active, not static. 4 communities, 10% are entirely new to our list this year, while another 10% return after not being included just in the last year's report. And there's also a shifting among communities that make the list in previous years. So a community's arts and cultural scene may have experienced a big change, like the opening of a large art space. Or because these measures are all calculated on a per capita basis, it could very well be that population change was on a different trajectory from growth in arts and culture. And also this point that arts vibrant communities exist in every region. As you can see on the map, arts vibrancy isn't just on the coast, and it's not just in big cities. There's no part of the country that has the market cornered on arts vibrancy. And this finding arises naturally out of objective analyses of the data, not from us handpicking communities to achieve selected geographic representation. Next slide. So here you have the top 20 arts vibrant large communities with a population over 1 million. We provide the region as well as the population. This was published just about a month ago, or so ago. And a few points to make is vibrancy takes many different forms. So some communities have really large, impressive nonprofit arts and cultural institutions. So, think of New York. Some burst with smaller organizations and venues. Think about Austin. Others are magnets for artists or tourist destinations. Numerous art sectors are vibrant in some communities, so they may be strong in museums as well as opera, as well as theater, while other cities are capitals of a particular kind of art form. So if you look on the list, you'll see Nashville and New Orleans, which are super strong in music. All of this emerges in the data. Another point you see here is this concentration versus dispersion. So very large metropolitan statistical areas experience vibrancy through high concentration or tends to be extensive dispersion of arts and culture. So some large MSAs feature a strong concentration, like Chicago and Seattle. Both of these have other metropolitan divisions in greater MSA that appear on the list. So we see arts and culture really concentrated in that urban core. However, you have other areas like Boston and Cambridge, which are two metropolitan divisions of the same MSA, where both of them make the top vibrancy list. So you can see that concentration versus dispersion, both of people and organizations, is important to consider. And we know this based on what we've learned about the influence of distance on attendance. Next slide. Here you see a list of the top 10 arts vibrant medium communities and small communities. So we break these into 100,000 to 1 million, as well as small communities, which are micropolitan areas with a population under 100,000. The arts vibrancy's multidimensional framework and per capita approach provide insights into why two cities that may seem very different on the surface might be very close to one another within the rankings. So, for example, if you look on the medium community list, you'll see Boulder, Colorado, next to Wilmington, Delaware. Next slide, please. Here we're going to break down, and I'll share with you the measures of arts vibrancy. We look at 4 different measures of supply, demand, and government support. And you'll recognize the arts and culture ecosystem. So arts providers on a per capita basis, we look at independent artists, arts and culture employees, arts and culture organizations, and then arts, culture, and entertainment firms. For arts dollars, we think of this as if you pull together the program revenue, contributed revenue, total expenses, and total compensation of all of the nonprofit arts and cultural organizations, and then made it out on a per capita basis, this is what we're looking at as demand. So both of those categories we weight at 45%. Government support, which we look at state and federal number of grants and dollars, we weight at 10%. And there are 947 MSAs and metro divisions, so ranking between 1 and 95 means that you're actually in the top 10% in terms of ranking. Now, measuring traits to us is more than just a counting exercise. When you look at, for example, per capita arts and cultural organizations, all else being equal, same population, same community, one has 30 arts and cultural organizations, one has 3. The one with 30 has more availability of arts experiences for people to engage with and greater variety to choose from. So more preferences, interests, and cultural expressions can be met. Given the symbiotic relationship between arts organizations and their communities, the Arts Vibrancy Index can help arts leaders, businesses, government agencies, funders, citizens understand the overall intensity and capacity of the community's arts and cultural sector. And past AVI reports, I think about Bennington, Vermont. This is who we have just shown up here as an example. John Shanahan, who is the director of Better Bennington, had gotten back to us to let us know that to have made the list of most vibrant communities was a spark that created a firestorm. Their 5-person arts committee is now the Cultural Bennington Arts Council, over 150 strong. Since receiving this distinction, we've become recognized by the state of Vermont for our accomplishments, and the town of Bennington is help promoting the distinction. There's also good ways that communities that otherwise were doing great work in terms of arts supply. There's a strong sense of vibrancy already there. Simply getting the recognition has helped them to raise awareness in their own communities about the vibrancy that exists. Next slide. Here you see a copy of our heat map. So on our website, we list arts vibrancy. The different colors indicate the different percentiles that a community falls into. You just click or scroll onto a county and click to see your county scores. We did this because there are about 41% of counties around the United States that don't have a part within the community that even qualifies as a micropolitan statistical area. So no urban core with a community of at least 10,000 population. Here, we also add in characteristics of the community socioeconomics and other leisure characteristics. If you see, for example, this is looking at Philadelphia, A ranking of 98 on Arts Dollars means that Philadelphia County is in the top 2% of counties on that measure. And there are about 63 counties that rank higher because there are over 3,000 counties in the US. Arts leaders have let us know they've used the map in a variety of ways, from considering where to locate their operations to what markets are right for touring, exhibitions, or performances. Next slide. I just want to share that we do arts vibrancy comparative studies. We conduct these customized comparative studies so that communities can benchmark themselves against peer and an aspirational set of communities so that they can understand what sets them apart by examining the underlying dimensions of demand, supply, et cetera. Different funders like the Walton Family Foundation have engaged with the ABI data to better understand how investments to increase arts vibrancy might be best directed in the communities that they serve, given existing strengths and opportunities for improvement. And with the Walter Foundation, we work to say it's a new foundation if they want to make investments in inclusive community development and wanted to spur vibrancy throughout the Chicagoland area. What are parts of the community that are currently really densely served by nonprofit arts and cultural organizations versus which parts of the community only have a few organizations? If they wanted to make investments in more socioeconomically diverse parts of the community, could they do that? And we're able to show that all through the data. And so with that, I'll leave you with a few final thoughts. Michelle, if you can advance. How arts vibrant is your community? Thoughts. Arts vibrancy takes many forms. How is it manifest in your community? And what are peer communities doing that you'd actually like to emulate? Next slide. What are your community's relative strengths and weaknesses? What will you plan to improve and how? This is really a time of such considerable environmental hostility, uncertainty about the future as pertains to arts and culture. We really want to offer this report, this information as a celebration and a reminder of the arts' enduring importance, resiliency, and vibrancy. We shouldn't forget the essential role that the arts play, both in fueling economic development, but also emotional health, cultural literacy, social cohesion and integration, communities' identity, and creative expression. And with that now, I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
Great. And the next slide. So first of all, just thank you for those great collection of stats and stories. And Randy, I'll tell you what, to generate economic activity in Times Square, I'm going to go to Wisconsin, milk that guy's cow, and he can come to New York and see a show. We've got a great show. It's the Plastic Bag Store, very small, socially distant, appropriate performances. There aren't Broadways, of course. And while I'm out there, I'll do some get out the vote activity in a swing state for a president who actually cares about the arts. So I want to talk a little bit about within the context of Times Square, the intersection of arts and economic development and how our own thinking about it has evolved in different ways. I think one of the best ways and simplest ways that I can just make the case, as we've all seen everywhere, but it's really striking in Times Square for the economic power of the arts, is what happens when it's not there. So next slide. Obviously Broadway brings about 40, when it's full, brings about 40,000 people a night and sometimes twice a day to the area. And so when Broadway's closed down, Times Square is closed down. I've said that when Broadway gets a cold, when Broadway sniffles, Times Square gets a cold, and when Times Square gets a cold, New York City is in the emergency room. And that's really the case because we're now at a situation where, of course, part of it is the drop in tourism, but part of the reason that tourists came to Times Square anyway was because of the draw of the theater and the arts. And so next slide. So the kind of economic activity that we've seen historically, which is 15 billion in economic activity just from Broadway alone, 96,000 jobs, that goes up in smoke. And so we have, at least half of our, to Randy's point, the restaurants, the shops, the hotels that are around Broadway, around our arts assets are closed. So that in a nutshell for me is a very striking way of making the case for the way in which a cluster of arts entities drive economic activity. Next slide. When our organization was first started in 1992, we without really being conscious about it or talking about it this way, we did a lot, before I was there, we did a lot of programming and arts programming that was really designed to do two things. To change perception about Times Square, because Times Square was perceived and had been very, very dangerous, and also to draw crowds. So even the programming of New Year's Eve was suddenly thought of like, this is a chance for us to put out a certain kind of more pop culture, but cultural programming to change perceptions about Times Square and to draw different kind of crowds and different things. Next. Similar thing was when for the 1992 Democratic Convention, which happened in New York, Broadway did an outdoor performance called Broadway on Broadway, Broadway the Street, which itself was a radical way of showing that Times Square was safe and family friendly and was part of changing perceptions. And at the time, it was a very radical idea. And then over years, that grew to attract people and help to change perceptions. So, so there's this way, as we all know, which arts and cultural activity can increase footfall because you're drawing crowds for big events, and also can change the perceptions about a place in a variety of ways. Next. And then when I came in, we started doing really small scale things, sort of stumbled into them. We just thought, how do we improve the environment, our public space environment? Decided to engage a bunch of graphic artists to do a project related to a kind of urban forest in Times Square. And one of the things that was interesting was literally within 48 hours, we had about 184 banners. Within 48 hours, every single one of those banners had been volunteered by a graphic artist to design something. And we realized that our arts program could be a way of channeling the creative energy of New York City overall in Times Square and giving people a platform. Next. But we were still really just thinking about like, how do we do things that are fun and interesting, look good? We decided to do a Valentine's Heart during a slow time of the year in February and commissioned emerging architects to come up with some manifestation of a heart to celebrate love in Times Square and to draw attention to the fact it was a good place to have a date, and to, you know, classic way of having art drive certain economic activity by drawing attention through things. Keep going. Next. And then through open calls, we started again tapping into these other pools of talent in the city. In this case, Shenway Dance Arts to do dance performances in Times Square. Next. We took advantage of our existing assets, the digital screens, to have international artists like Tracy Emin come and do, again, initially it was, you know, Valentine's, celebrating things that were pretty and fun. And that's an important part, especially in the early phases of any arts program, which are to do things that bring people joy and that are beautiful and make people happy. Next. But then we began to really, because artists were coming to us, we started to do things that spoke to what our place was. And this is where I want to get into the notion of arts can drive economic activity by nurturing a conversation about what is authentic about a place, by highlighting what the authentic cultural assets of a place are, and by moving into activism. Because if you don't have an arts program that nurtures authenticity and nurtures activism, I would argue, then you are also holding yourself back from some of the key elements of a vibrant city and an economically prosperous city. So here you see capitalism lost here in the middle of Times Square. But it was a way of having some fun and reflecting on what is it about this place, Times Square, which represents what people love and hate about cities, about capitalism, about America, and about New York, that artists can respond to. Next. Through our Midnight Moment program, we had Alfredo Jar comment on, as immigration issues were becoming more and more significant, about what is the definition of America, to the extent that Times Square itself represents some aspects of America to the rest of society. Next. Then the Valentine's Heart, which, as I told you, started off as really a, let's make something pretty and fun, began to respond to the times. And so an architect came to us with a notion of having these bars on, these colored bars represent the different immigrant populations within New York City. And as a way of saying that sending love to immigrants and people who are in our city from outside of this place. So we're addressing both like what is authentic about New York, and Times Square particularly is a place like many successful downtowns, where as it became successful, we started to lose some of our richness, our cultural richness, because people got priced out of being there. So one of the things that we realized we could do through our arts program was begin to invite some of the people who, through market forces, were maybe less present in Times Square back into Times Square. Next. So similarly, another project, this one where you could get into this old-fashioned phone booth, pick up the phone, and hear an immigrant from a borough far away from Manhattan talk about their daily life experience as an immigrant. Next. And then we did a partnership with the Queens Museum and Mel Chin, a museum that's not in the core of Manhattan, where we're bringing its assets and audience to Times Square. Mel Chin did a piece that was talking about global warming and imagining this shipwreck at the bottom of the Times Square, where the seas were way above this shipwreck's head, and touching on these issues that are affecting our larger society. Next. And then last year, we put forth this sculpture by Kehinde Wiley, his first public art sculpture, called Rumors of War, where he took the framing of a Confederate statue and had an African-American youth on that statue as a way of addressing some of the racial issues in our country. And for us, this was a way of making sure that, and I think this is true for any town square or center of a place, that is your public forum where you are discussing, or you have the opportunity to discuss, what the things are that are going on in a country. So next slide. So we began to really articulate at the same time of a sense that what we wanted Times Square to be, our town square, to be a place that reflects the richness and the authenticity and the diversity of New York City. Next slide. We talked about, we wanted to be a laboratory for contemporary art in the public realm, creating conversations about Times Square and all that it represents about New York, urban life, public space, commerce, and America. And that it's a place of free expression. And the reason to do that is, again, that if what has happened over the last 15 or 20 years as our cities had become more prosperous was that they, in certain cases, became less diverse. Certain populations were heard and seen less. So how can Times Square be a platform for lesser heard, lesser known voices, lesser seen voices in a way that nurtures authenticity? Next. And furthermore, how can art be a way of nurturing the activism which is essential to address the ills that our cities face? So I think we all know the depth of divisions that we have in our country right now, and the ways in which our country is paralyzed, not just by the COVID epidemic, but by sort of the unresolved issues that exist in our society, the unresolved issues and inequities. Next slide. And there is a very, very real way in which we can say that if we are not addressing those issues, then economic activity will not happen. So it's not only that the arts can drive footfall and changing perceptions, but arts also must address the ways in which our cities, especially our prosperous center cities, may not reflect the richness of our society. And also an arts program can, next slide, begin to be a mechanism for having us look at ourselves and look at our society and say, what needs to be fixed? How do we see something that is sick or challenged in a new way? Because if we don't, those rumors of war will turn into war. So that would be my argument for why arts are important, not just for things like increasing footfall, not just for changing perceptions, but for nurturing authenticity and for nurturing activism, all of which are essential if we're to really achieve our full potential as a vibrant city and an economically prosperous one. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Randy and Zani and Tim for sharing that research and those case studies, and for ending us on such a powerful note. At this point, I'll open it up for questions. So folks who are participating, if you have those, you can put those in the Q&A or the chat. We have a few to start us off, and I'm going to read this question for the panelists. We are a grassroots effort trying to organize, and we're wondering what we can do at the city or county or state level. The arts at grassroots level is severely underfunded in this city. How do you make an argument for increasing arts funding in a city like Houston that isn't really a cultural destination, and who are our allies? There's a lot to unpack there.
Well, it's Randy. Hi, I can go first. So it sounds like, yeah, Houston's the city in question. Well, and of course, Houston is a fabulous arts city. You know, it's so culturally rich. So there's certainly a lot of good news to talk about there. You know, I think Houston was part of the Arts and Economic Prosperity Study, so there is economic impact data for the city. The county, I don't know, I was thinking it's like $640 million. Just, I don't know why that number popped in my head, but I can find out actually what it is. And so can you going to our website. You know, I think it's, you know, advocacy, you know, we've got to make the case. I've got a golden rule at Americans for the Arts. No numbers without a story, no stories without a number. And you just heard a lot of great numbers, as well as some stories. So who are the authorizers in your environment? And we've got to get to those folks to help them understand the power and the impact of the arts. And so really for advocacy, you can break it down to three questions. What's the message? Who gets the message? Who delivers the message? And so we've talked about the message of economic development, of revitalization, reanimation, you know, the Times Square's you know, examples of connecting arts to community, and jobs and government revenue. There's certainly plenty of other information out there that talks about, you know, the arts improve education and healthcare, 21st century workforce. So there's a lot of great messages. And then who gets the message? That's where you do your research, and, you know, who makes the decisions and what's important to them. And that's going to certainly impact, you know, what message you go in. We need a quiver full of case-making arrows, right? I mean, we got to be able to talk about jobs and, you know, education. And then who delivers the message? Obviously, we're the usual suspects in the arts, but we've got boards of directors with community leaders and business leaders. We've got neighbors, there's school principals and hospital CEOs. Who else can we bring to make that case also? So, you know, there's a lot of great content. There's a lot of great culture. There's a lot of great stories in Houston, and it's a city that's got a lot of great research as well. You know, I think working with the Houston Arts Alliance is certainly a good place, you know, to build, you know, your advocacy machine.
And this is Zani. I would echo what Randy said, just thinking about, you know, best approaches. I think there's always strength in numbers. So any individual organization, you know, think of who else could you bring to the table? You know, what kind of coalition, how can you kind of amplify the voice? And making sure that you do leverage your network of getting board members, not only of your organization, but who else do they have within their networks that can help to tap into, whether it's local or state legislatures, to try to bring that awareness. And then think about what is the angle that we want to achieve? You know, is it really a matter of dollars? Is it a percentage of allocation of state or local budget? You know, of have that clarity of message. Not only, yes, the arts are important, and they are absolutely imperative for economic development and economic impact, but also the question of, in the end, this is what we want to achieve, and then kind of structure your approach to them leading towards whatever that end goal happens to be.
Great, thank you, Randy and Zani. Tim, this looks like a question for you, so I'll pose this one to you, although anyone can jump in. How important are relations with newspapers, and how can art and journalism help each other?
I think it's a great question. Well, first of all, is just how important are newspapers? They're critical to our entire democracy, and so anything anybody can do to support newspapers is great. And I think that obviously it's a mechanism for just getting the word out for what we're doing. So one of the things is it has simply been a way in which we draw greater attention to our programs. And one of the things I always think about in Times Square that I think is relevant for everyone and that we've all experienced in the Zoom era is thinking about the analog experience of whatever the art is that's being offered, but what's the digital extension of that? And so I'll broaden the term newspaper to just sort of, media outlets that are sharing our platform for some portion of our content. We had an outdoor program called Best of the Buskers, where we had Broadway musicians performing work that they had composed by themselves, and it used to be out in our public plazas, and then it was all online. And a really critical thing in terms of how we got the word out about that was through the sort of targeted press of the hardcore Broadway fans, whether it was Broadway.com or Playbill or other things like that. So that's one thing, is it's a critical thing for just sort of expanding one's audience, especially virtually and digitally. And the second thing is, for us, especially because we are a business improvement district, an economic development entity, and we're not a traditional arts entity. I think it was very important for us to get coverage in serious art outlets and to get within mainstream publications reviews from serious art critics for our programs, for us to be taken seriously, which within the art community, which allowed us to have partnerships with art entities like the Queen's Museum, but also to draw artists themselves who said, am I just going to be used as a promotional tool for some, Valentine's sale, or am I actually going to be able to do art? And by getting reviews from arts entities, that also gave us some legitimacy in the arts world that we were doing this with integrity.
Great, thank you, Tim. For the sake of time, I think I've got two more questions for our panelists. Zani, we've got some specific ones about arts vibrancy, but they apply certainly across the board. So the specific question is, would you consider measuring arts vibrancy in rural states? The arts in rural areas are egregiously underfunded. And it sounds like this person is expressing a challenge with making the case for arts vibrancy there. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how our work intersects with rural communities.
Certainly. Part of the reason why we provide the online heat map on a county by county basis is so 0.6% of the U.S. outside does not have even a micropolitan area, these really rural areas, can look at vibrancy within their county. So the data and the information is there, and we do see vibrancy throughout the country. We see vibrancy in many rural areas. So, encourage you to take a look at the heat map, find your community, click on it and look at the data that's there. And if you want to drill down further than that, to get in contact with us and let us know what additional information we might be able to provide. And I think narrative, this notion that arts are something just for the city is just on the coast, when we know the fact of the matter is that the arts exist wherever, including throughout the United States. So it's just a question of data that supports whatever kinds of asks and awareness you want to be able to create within your community. There are success stories throughout the country.
Randy or Tim, anything else to add before we take our final question?
Yeah, onto the pending Zani's response. And then also a question, I think, from Gary about, I think it was small and diverse organizations. It's really that we have to prize and value the whole cultural ecology in a community. And especially as we think about cultural tourism, travelers these days, whether it's domestic or international, are looking for authentic cultural experiences. They're looking to build memories, and you do that through experiences, and that's the arts, right? That's, you know, the arts are experiences. And so it's important to remember that we need the whole spectrum of cultural opportunities, neighborhood organizations, you know, historic heritage. What's the story? What's the history of this community? Who lives here? How do they express, you know, through art forms, you know, all the way to, you know, the big major organizations as well, because that's a vibrant, creative, cultural community. That's also what drives this cultural tourism and economic development.
I couldn't agree more, Randy. You know, and thank you for bringing that up. You know, sometimes when communities see that their comparative level of vibrancy on a per capita basis isn't what they would like it to be, you know, the instinct is to say, well, what can we bring in? What can we import from someplace else? When the fact of the matter is the most compelling experiences are those that are tied to the identity of a place. What are the traditions? What is the cultural heritage? That really rooting in what makes a community unique is the thing that helps to increase vibrancy. It's what starts attracting other artists who work in that space to live there, to see it. So it's really, what is the excellence that already exists that can be celebrated and amplified?
Great. With that, I'll ask for all three panelists to weigh in on this kind of portion of a question. So there's a question of if there are studies that project what will be happening in the arts community in cities over the next few years as a result of this pandemic. And so I'll pose that to all three panelists. Maybe you could share a little bit about how you're approaching and thinking about the next few months and years in this moment.
Well, at Americans for the Arts, we've got two big national surveys looking at artists and creative workers, as well as as arts organizations, but really has a focus on nonprofit arts and cultural organizations. And, you know, the news, as is evidenced all around us, has been devastating. 95% of organizations have had to cancel work. We estimate they've lost $14.1 billion to date. 10% doubt their ability to make it to the other side of this pandemic. They are responding well, 2/3 now doing virtual programming. 40% have opened, 60% haven't yet, with the majority of those don't have a plan yet. And then for artists, you know, it's been devastating. Again, 96% have lost creative income. Average financial losses this year, $22,000 per artist as a result of the pandemic. 63% unemployed. So the challenge is, I mean, well, there are many, is, you know, if only this was just a recession, you know, it'd be a bad recession or a horrible recession, but, you know, we've all got a playbook for recessions. It's hard. But we just don't know how long this is going to go on. We also know government budgets are going to be whacked next year. And so state and local funding is going to be a challenge. So it's going to take a couple of years, and some organizations, large and small, won't be with us till we get to the other side, when we get to the other side. But staying connected to community is going to be vital. How can the arts, we need to be partnering with everybody. We need to be, you know, thinking about advancing our community and making sure people hear the message of arts and vitality, arts in the economy, jumpstarting the economy, and reunifying our communities, because those are the big worries now. And we do that. That's our work.
Tim, do you have anything to add? I'll let you have the final word.
So I am not answering the question directly, but three thoughts come to mind. One is, the next few years are going to be incredibly difficult, but I do fundamentally believe that people's hunger for arts and live entertainment and the in-person experience will survive. We've been through this many times with Broadway, where people said the movies are going to kill live theater. Then they said television is going to kill live theater. And then they said the internet is going to kill live theater and cities. There is always an appeal and a need for these visceral experiences that are different from what one gets just digitally. Secondly, I think that with the economic downturn presents opportunities. As we all know, artists have been sort of priced out of cities and more expensive places with prosperity. One of the few good things about the economic downturn is that it will be less expensive and there will be more space available for artists to activate and use and to be able to create communities in a way that they did, for instance, in New York, in the 70s and 80s when it was very different economically. And then the third thing is, I think it all depends on what happens next Tuesday, but we all need to advocate for a kind of vision that's like the WPA, where there are resources put not into like building highways, but into employing artists directly on a huge scale as part of anyone's economic recovery plan.
All right, Zani, any last words, anything to add before we close?
I would simply encourage everyone to get out and vote. We are all somewhat responsible for our own futures. So I want to give a hearty thanks to Randy and to Tim for joining in this conversation. And thanks to Michelle and Monica for getting us organized.
Thank you. Great to be with you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We have a ton of resources for you, as well as some questions that went unanswered that we're happy to kind of follow up with you afterwards. So look out for an email from us and we'll make sure you get all those resources and have an opportunity to ask further questions if you like. But with that, I'll say have a wonderful afternoon and thank you so much again for joining us.